seems like the trend at the moment on a lot of. I think the kind of political YouTube channels have sort of done quite well. So a lot of the conspiracy YouTube channels are now doing panel shows, essentially debates.
Yeah.
And I've been brought onto 2 of them now, and neither of them have been published, by the way, so far.
Good for you.
Which is says a lot.
Yeah,
well, one was only today, so they might publish it. Although, like I said, one of the guys from the show emailed me to say we might not publish that one. But yeah, I mean, it was just both cases were
Tony Clifton,
a cult bad. We all agree. That's been on the one guy that doesn't agree, and that was me in these 2 cases, because I seem to be the only one that's stupid enough to actually do these. But it's what's blown me away, and what I've discovered, I suppose, from doing these, and I sort of suspected this, and I read a lot of Baudrillard, so I'm always thinking like this, I suppose, is that this idea of the hyperreality, this idea where, it was a thing that was said for years and years and years. Oh, Twitter and real life, they're completely separate things. The Twitter's like a massively amplified version of reality. And when you come out into the real world, people aren't like that. People don't believe that kind of thing. But I say bullshit. I think it's taken over. I think that now that's reality.
Yeah,
that's reality on Twitter. Yeah. And what we now, things like facts and logic don't matter anymore. And that's the thing that blows my fucking mind. Like on these debates, it was all about Crowley. It's always about Crowley. I mean, it always is. They haven't got the brain span or mental ability to actually read anything else other than sort of TikTok fucking posts about Aleister Crowley made by morons. So I'm still angry about this, because this was only earlier today. And it's like, it just blows my mind that you come. I mean, it was the classic that we've spoken about on the show before. Kill 125 kids, blah blah blah. Which is quickly to summarize, it was just about masturbation, because at the time, if Crowley said masturbate, he would have been done under the indecency laws in the UK, and gone to prison. So he had to hide it behind what they called an occult blind. So that's basically was my explanation. I knew that that's what they were going to say, because that's all they ever fucking say. So I brought tons of evidence, links, everything. And I was just called a Wikipedia warrior. A Wikipedia warrior, even though I was providing them with like scans, PDF scans of books and things like this. Yeah. And it's like, and then it suddenly occurred to me, these people don't care about the facts. They don't care.
They don't.
Nothing
they don't, dude.
Tell them. They will not care what you tell to them.
This is why I stopped doing those panels years ago, because I finally realized that the people you were debating don't care about facts. They already know what they want to say. They've already made up their mind before they show up. They already know probably what you're going to say, or they think they do. So they've got it. They're not there to debate. They're there to project something they already believe. Mm-hmm. And
they got angry. I mean, they got angry with me, but not for the reason I thought they were going to get angry with me for. I thought they were going to get angry because I made them look stupid, essentially. Because I did. They don't think you did. They don't think you did. But in their minds, they got angry with me because I wasn't towing the line of their reality, and that's the thing. That's the thing that's changed, and it's like.
And the people watching those things, a lot of times, most of the people watching that things are also the fans of those kind of people. So you're not going to convince anybody watching it either.
No,
it's you're going to get blowback from all the people watching it, talking about how you're an agent of the Illuminati or blah 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 blah.
Oh yeah. I got that when I appeared on,
and I just got tired of it. I was like, why? I'm not convincing anybody of anything. We're not having a debate, really.
But what's scary is it's not just it used to be. Sorry, I had to just clear my throat there.
Yeah,
my rage built up in my throat. It's not just in these groups anymore, though. It's happening. I mean, we saw it with Trump
across the board.
It's everywhere now. It's like and I noticed it. Obviously, I was telling you guys I got ill, so that's why I've been away for a while. Just a cold, whatever. But during the time I was ill, I was like, okay, how wide is this thing happening? How. And I started to really look at it properly, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's like reality's lost the battle against hyperreality, and it's like, oh my god, that's scary. That really is quite scary, because it starts to one of the statistics I looked at, a good example of hyperreality was conservatives in America's belief in the vaccine. So okay, that's, it's a meme. People on the right or whatever, people, Republicans didn't believe in the vaccine, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But when you actually look at the statistics, you look at liberals versus Republicans, or, whatever, versus Republicans, under 50% of people took the vaccine, conservative voters. So that means this hyperreality bullshit created deaths. It caused people to die.
Yeah.
And it's like, you think, well, what the fuck is going on? Why are people?
Dude, we had a guy in the White House, probably the one place, the one position in the United States that could have made a difference, like to the COVID pandemic, that could have made some decisions early on. That he comes from that whole Norman Vincent Peale, like, don't say bad things, always think positive thoughts, and everything will work out for you. Prosperity gospel, and that was what we were getting in the White House. The one place that could have made the decision to do some things early on that could have like saved not everybody, but like, 1 million people in the United States plus died, especially in the beginning. Like everybody who had comorbidities, like was dying, like just dropping like flies. Like people forget that, but like everybody's forgotten that. Like in New York City, we were running out of places to bury people. Like what the fuck? And that didn't have to happen that way, but it happened that way because we had like the person who's the epitome of what you're describing running the country, and then a bunch of people around him that either were like that or were afraid to say no.
You can even argue that he got into power because of hyperreality as well. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, because he's got like all these people, like,
magic.
And it's all this kind of stuff. It's like, wow, it just suddenly hit me. I think I'd been saying it for a long time, look out for the hyperreality. And it's when it actually slaps you in the face, you suddenly realize, oh shit, this is actually here, and it's fucking scary. Like and this isn't just in the US.
Right when the pandemic hit, I had a buddy of mine call me that I've known for almost 40 years. And we started like practicing in the Golden Dawn together. That's how far back we go. And I've always known him to be, a person like me who like not overly rational and not overly irrational, like a good balance, like, because you got to have both. You need some madness as well, especially if you're an artist. And he just called me in a panic, like right after the pandemic started, and started going off on me about 5G and the fact that they just turned 5G on was activating this virus, and the virus was engineered to be activated. And I'm just like listening to this, and I'm like, okay, he's either kidding, he's pulling my leg. This is like he's doing an Andy Kaufman routine on me, which he was capable of doing. But the more I listened to him, the more I realized it wasn't a bit. And I don't know what pushed him down that path, because he's like always been one of the more balanced people I've known in my life. And we don't talk anymore because of it.
Was he a New Ager by any chance?
No, he's like us. He was kind of a Western Hermetic tradition person.
Yeah, because I suppose that happened en masse with the New Age movement. COVID, and like it.
That I expect.
Yeah, but you kind of expect it with them, but the COVID thing amplified it. It made it much bigger, much faster, much more kind of, I remember people posting on Twitter going, oh my God, or X, sorry, going, I can't believe all these New Age crystal guys are, anti-vaxxers. And I was like, they were anti-vax before it was cool to be anti-vax. They've always been anti-vax.
The original anti-vaxxers.
Exactly. They've been
OG anti-vaxxer.
But it's insane. I mean, it's got to crazy levels now. And it makes me really worried. We're in this pivotal year now where both our countries are about to elect new leaders, and it's like, shit. What the hell's going to happen? Like, if people aren't, people are ignoring reality and, believing this kind of crazy, hyped up, amped up, weird mistruth version of reality, how fucked are we? And that's like, I don't know. To me, that's scary as fuck. But,
one thing I think that like I was sort of thinking about similar things about just the culture right now. And I think that, and it sort of hit me with Roger Corman's death. And there's just been, basically the 20th century is dying, right? So we're in this period where that place, which was the 20th century, you know, the mind space, the reality of the 20th century is dying. And the people that upheld that worldview are dying. And we're in this weird kind of interim point, you know, where things are in flux and new worldviews, new senses of reality are being born, you know?
Yeah, we're in the interregnum.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, this is like the human organism's reaction to that shift.
Yeah.
Because the one thing, you know, with the you have wealth disparity. So that's one of the things I'm noticing, you know, and I'm sure there's a bunch of papers on this with the study of conspiracy theories and that, but obviously like social dynamics play into part, you know, and you were talking earlier about there is no satanic panic 2.0 because it's just an assumed reality that there's, you know, these hidden occult forces that are manipulating reality.
And there's no moral panic behind it. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Before it was a newish kind of thing where it never really spun out into this kind of giant society-wide thing.
Well, I think it's interesting. Like there can't really be a moral panic because the people that are pushing the idea of an occult conspiracy are occultists themselves.
Yeah.
They're just not calling themselves that. And despite the fact that they have a worldview which, you know, lends credence to hidden forces and the rest of it, you know, so they're occultists. You know, and it's kind of a weird sort of self-hating occultist that and you see that in a lot of the people that have like hardline worldviews on that end. There's just a lot of like, you can tell that they want to go to the Illuminati party, you know, like that they're kind of upset that they didn't get invited or they think that they should be, you know. And so it's a lot of kind of like hatred towards this idea of, you know, these people that live freely and, you know, can murder at will and do whatever, you know.
And there are those kind of people in the world, but like they're not being called out correctly by these folks. Like,
exactly. And it's a lot more mundane and like, you know, and in that sense darker, you know. I mean, I think the banality of it is actually darker.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. I mean, even on, sorry, I'll let you go back in a second, but even on those debates, I said it in both debates. I said there are actual occult groups doing dodgy shit out there, and you guys never talk about them. You never mention them.
Or just actual people. They don't even have to be occult groups. Just people doing dodgy shit.
I mean, the obvious example is the Order of Nine Angles, right? They're an actual group trying to change society.
Well, I don't think they're an actual group. They're like
it's an idea. It's an ideology.
Yeah, it's an idea. They're more like anonymous. They're like,
but that kind of thing. That's part of the danger with the digital thing is the decentralized organization. Which is just hubbed on an ideology.
Which is what the O9A is. It's not even it's a decentralized idea.
Right. And it's what these conspiracy worldviews are too. You know, they're these decentralized things that are hubbing on these ideologies. And like you said, I mean, with like Crowley and that, like they don't read the books. It's literally at the point where it's like they're getting information that's like a TikTok that was pulled off of a YouTube that was pulled off of like Alex Jones, who was pulling off of Bill, you know, Cooper, and like we're just getting these rehashed like.
And they have the audacity to say, "Do your own research." That's the thing. That's the thing that would get so much.
But that's the mind. I mean, that's the weird thing. It's like that's the mind virus, the do your own research thing. You know, I mean, it's it's very strange.
And none of them have probably read a Crowley book. What they're quoting is somebody quoting somebody who said they read a Crowley book.
Right.
Who probably nowhere in that chain, probably nobody has read the book.
Yeah, well, you know they haven't. I mean, that's too many. That's to read to actually get a sense of like Crowley's right. That's a lot of reading. You know, that's a lot of reading. But I think that do your own research thing, I think, is another kind of like tell on what the kind of driver behind this kind of, to some extent, you know, maybe one of the drivers. Do your own research, right? You look at Walter Lippmann's stuff back called his book Public Philosophy. It was written in the 1920s. And one of the things that he said was, and this was H.G. Wells, I forget what, The Invisible Conspiracy, he wrote something like that. It was about basically science was becoming so specialized that science at a political level and at a global level, suddenly a large swath of the population is cut out from all decision making, right? Like once you have a nuclear bomb, you can't have people voting on issues. Like you just can't, because you know, you get you know, what we've seen in the United States. And there's people that would be like, oh yeah, drop that bomb, you know, just destabilize the whole thing, because they have no clue. It takes specialization. But
who was it that said, like, who was it that postulated that it wouldn't be an equal planet until everybody had a nuclear weapon? Was it like Mary Baker Eddy or somebody like that? Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it you know, and so it that draws in this kind of powerlessness, right? But on the flip side, the specialists aren't capable of running a holistic system, right? Like specialization just continues to. Austin Osman Spare actually talked about that. Like if you keep dividing the line, you just keep getting smaller and smaller bits that don't, you know, and so we're missing this connecting point between like the people and the specialists, the population and the specialists. And within that gap, you have this idea of, you know, you have people aspiring to be the specialist, but they don't realize it. It's like that sense of like, there's these people that know more than I know, that know the levers, right? And like, if I can just figure out what those levers are, I'm released from this tension of, you know, of being kind of helpless amongst economic and global and all the rest of it. While at the same time, you know, the actual like meat of what gets kind of pulped into this conspiracy hot dog is, you know, stuff like just the weapons trade. I mean, like you know, a massive portion of the global economy is run on guns and missiles and you know, various military things. Whether and going beyond that, I mean, like the internet, the whole thing, like it's a giant war planet, you know? And so how does a person deal with that? You know, I mean, how do you deal with that? Like that hit me last night. I got like a LinkedIn newsletter from Foreign Policy Institute or something like that, based out of the US. And every single thing, like foreign policy, right? Which, as you just say, foreign policy, and that's got a broad range of things it can cover. Every single article was Russia, Ukraine, China. Or Russia, Ukraine, China in the Sudan, or Russia in Africa. And it was all focused on the power competition and how do we win the power competition? Right.
The same thing we've been talking about since the Cold War.
What's that?
The same thing we've been fighting about since the Cold War.
Yeah, well, that was what I was thinking. I was like, wow, this is like straight out of the Cold War. Like this is
straight. It never ended.
Like,
we took a breath. When the Soviet Union
there was
collapsed.
That brief period in the 90s where it was like, okay, like Gorbachev is chilling in an Esalen spa.
Exactly. Like, maybe we're not going to kill each other. We're going to kill ourselves. But then it went right back to it. So
and so that's where we're, you know, the population has no place for that, right? The population's not selling guns. They're not, you know, they're either victims of the wars or, you know, the violence and stuff, and it's just perpetuating. And there's not really a good kind of just sane, mature voice or hub or worldview or anything that's out there, because everything that could be that is a lifestyle brand, you know? And so we have lifestyle brands presenting themselves, and which is further into this hyper reality thing, right? We have simulacra of a solution, you know, that are presenting themselves, you know, because I mean, like the new age comes out of the 1800s with millennialist thought and theosophy and like Christian millennialism and stuff like that. And then it moves into the new thought stuff. And then it goes into the 50s where it's, you know, contactees and UFOs and psychic development and that. But then what we know of as the new age was the think tanks getting a hold of all these disparate parts and starting to test those, right? And then creating a product out of it. You know, we know the product that was derived. That's not a solution. It's a commercial product.
Yeah.
You know, and so, and that's what we've had for the past.
And people need to remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we've had for it's lifestyle brands and commercial products and services.
Well, it's the American reaction. Like, how do we commoditize this? Like whenever anything comes along, like the internet is a perfect example. Like the internet was this great, cool thing. And then all of a sudden it got the interest of commercial interest, and then it went to shit. Like where we are now. It's like if you look at the internet now versus the internet in 1995 or even 99, it's like it's a vastly different landscape.
Yeah.
And back then, like I'm talking about this recently to somebody who was interviewing me for a book, and it was I said, I remember the early days of the internet was very interesting because everybody who had a website was basically an artist.
Yeah.
And each one of those websites was an expression of some kind of art. or like, I mean, literally websites were done as art pieces, but then also there were like artists were like Dimitri, the guy that ran Deoxy.org, like was a monstrous website. One guy.
Yeah.
In upstate New York, just sitting there, like just cranking this thing out since 1993. Like 93 is when he started, because he contacted me and said, I want to use the Ong's Hat stuff. I'm like, have at it, dude. So like he grabbed it off of the Well Gopher and which was only text, and then turned into this beautiful website, like part of his Deoxy website. It was called the Incunabula Research Center. Deoxy's back up, by the way, if anybody wants to look at it, DEOXY.org. Somebody copied it and put up a mirror site, so it's back up. And anyway, so that's a perfect example of like one dude that I know some things about, but I'm not going to say. But like it's really, really impressive, like what he did with that website, considering his life circumstances. Like he should not have been able to do something that big, but he did, because he could sit. Like I said, he just sat there every day, all day long, and cranked on that thing and cranked on the thing and cranked on the thing. And then somewhere like in the 2010s, 2011s, that went away. Like blogs now, nobody gives a shit about blogs.
No, you have to do it via a Medium or Scribe or whatever. Don't you? It has to be monetized.
It has to be monetized, and you have to be doing it on a platform, like a gated community of some sort, like Twitter, and I just refuse to call that X, Twitter or Facebook or any one of those gated communities. Like the whole thing about like an artist having a website that was an expression of themselves, almost like a book. That's gone by the wayside. And like even me, who has a website that's been around since the early days of the internet, I mean, it still gets okay traffic, but it doesn't get the traffic it used to get.
Yeah.
Like unless I do something with the media, like if something comes out on Audible or something comes out on BBC or something, I see an uptick in my traffic. But then eventually it goes back down to like, a tenth of what it used to be. Like 2003, dude, I was getting hundreds of thousands of hits a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same as saying now. I mean, that's why we stopped doing, we used to post every day on Satan stories and essays and things, but it was just no point because people were coming for the podcast and that was it. That's
well, it's mobile. I mean, it's the mobile stuff because
and the mobile
websites are terrible on that. You can't navigate a website, even mobile friendly websites. They become it's basically just a social media like front end on a website. It's just like interactive graphics and stuff. And it's all you were hard coding in the background to put the website up, whereas now you have the platform dynamics and that's what you get, So as fancy as you can get with WordPress, or something like that, like if you're actually going into the back end of it, you're still within set blocks of how it's going to show up.
Yeah, you're restricted to like their choices unless you write themes, which I do. But I don't even do that much anymore. I mean, I wrote a theme a long time ago that I'm still using. Like I don't update the design on my website. And I used to do it like once a year.
Yeah.
I would do a major design overhaul on my website. And I've had the same design on my blog for 10 fucking years. So, because I don't care. It's like, it doesn't matter anymore. It's like not why people go there anymore. It's like people basically come to my website mostly through news pointing, like news articles pointing to it or social media, period.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
Well, and they were talking to a project guy at LinkedIn. They were saying that what they're encouraging people to do, and this is professionals, right? Like CEOs of like major corporations, that if they're going to do a press release, do your press release and your corporate PR and all the rest of that. But they recommended having like a you know, like a C-suite level person at the company do like I'm wearing a sweatshirt and like just got off my jog and I'm now doing a vertical video like right up in my face, like this is really great, like you know, I haven't had my first coffee yet and we've already sold off, you know, like 2 billion in stock. And so doing like major announcements like on like, you know, like what would be a TikTok video, you know, and not even a produced TikTok video, like just raw, like weird lighting and like all the rest of it. So that's that's the exact opposite of a well-crafted website. You know, it's grab your phone and film yourself while you're, you know, not looking your best and just kind of ramble about what just happened. And that's their recommendation to like UN leaders, you know what I mean, who are going to go on to release information, to do the regular stuff,
to make yourself seem approachable.
Yeah, to make yourself seem approachable, and it's and also it's what the audience that they're finding based on the engagement. That's what people are reacting.
That's the expectation.
Yeah.
I'm doing a project right now. I can't because I'm under NDA. I can't say who it's for or even specifically what it's about. But part of it is it's a crafted narrative that goes along with it, and it's about this person who's, you know, basically doing just that. It's like we're creating things to look like it's a person in their living room talking to their phone. And I wrote the script to be that way. It's like the camera angles is like phone goes up and like everything's done on a phone, and it seems like it's happening in somebody's living room. Yeah. It's actually a highly produced production. Like it's been professionally written and everything, but it has to look like it's coming out of somebody's living room by a person who's like just doing it on their spare time.
That's key to the hyperreality thing too.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that a C-suite person at a major organization is going to be doing an impromptu like, hey, I'm just on my phone saying some stuff. You know, I mean, just the legal ramifications of that alone are huge. I mean, like you move the stock market the wrong way or say something weird, like, so that's all scripted.
Yeah.
But people are reacting to it as raw content, you know, raw whatever. But it's not, you know, and so that's just furthering our distance from like reality.
It's a simulation of a simulation already.
Yeah.
I wondered if
ideas.
I wondered if the hyperreality had hit the Vatican today. Did you see the Fox News post about I've got it here, Vatican preparing guidelines for apparitions?
I saw that yesterday.
So
other supernatural phenomena.
Can I just pontificate on that very quickly? There's a so I've been working on this course series with Diana Pasalka, and it's going to be like an introduction to UFOs and UAPs, kind of like a historical overview, some methodology, kind of like we're in this moment, how do we kind of orientate ourselves? And so I've been kind of tracking back on the UFO history in that and doing that kind of stuff. But
keep talking. I'm going to step away from the camera, but keep talking.
One of the things that I ran into was in my own self, just this kind of like, I know it's real. There's a real phenomena, but what does that mean? You know, what does that reality mean? And like, I've held the kind of, you know, the real, not real, and just sort of sit in that excluded middle. But it's weird because there's this shift now where you can't sit in the middle. There's actually a potential where this is real, you know, like this is effectively real, which it has been for people who have UFO experiences, but it hasn't necessarily been for the culture at large. And this is, again, kind of going back to those gaps that we see in different things. But there's a major conference, this SALT conference, which is kind of like a high level, like investment financial conference. Gary Nolan spoke at it last year about the UAP stuff. This year, they have the guy who was the head of the UAP task force for the Army with a talk that's called the Real Black Swan Event, UAP Disclosure. And what's interesting to me about that is that the conversation that the public is getting, the public at large, right, is largely sculpted around these kind of conspiracy narratives or underground bases or whatever, right? Like the sort of mythos of the UFO that hovers around that. But we're at a moment where the people who are, in a more powerful position in the society and culture are being told that UFOs are real. And so for investors and businesses, right, like with this being talked about at the SALT conference, this is now an issue that companies are going to have to take into account. Maybe, right? Like we don't know because we're outside of that conversation. But you have these things that are happening, and what we're seeing at the Vatican with this is an example that there's conversations happening in the background, obviously, that are driving forward, like people like Peter Thiel's interest in it, right? Like you got Eric Weinstein, who is over at Thiel Capital, and he's really interested in the UFO issue and the UAP stuff. And you have, Bigelow, right? Like as a long running one. So he's been in the sort of the background of all this kind of stuff. But the fact that it's becoming an issue that's being talked about at global forums and global forums for investment, right? And so I think that what we're seeing at the Vatican thing, they're talking about Marian apparitions and that. Well, going back into the history of the Marian apparitions, you have ufology. A lot of them look like UFO contact cases. So if we have this UAP thing coming out and it's actually going to be part of the culture now, the Vatican needs to take steps to make sure that they're not completely undermined, right? Like, because you've got this history of Marian apparitions since the 1800s that they've based some of their cultural capital on. And if suddenly science comes out and says, well, actually, that was not, Mary, but that was this phenomena here that we're now looking at and taking seriously. That's going to be it's going to majorly rock the Vatican. So, and the other thing that comes out with that, with everything surrounding the UAP thing, that's psychism, right? That's psychic powers and stuff. That's all the weird effects. That's all the things that really haven't been brought up outside of the, the subcultures that have talked about this stuff forever. But in the public conversation, just how drastically weird the UFO thing is, it just hasn't been brought out. So if it does suddenly become culturally, accepted, authorized, that opens the bag for like a lot of weird stuff that doesn't seem to make sense, but it would be something that the Vatican would then have to deal with on their thing. So I think that is probably a driver for what's going on with these meetings and stuff. They had the exorcist councils and stuff like that a couple of years ago, and that was in large part to kind of deal with the rise of Santa Muerta and the rise of traditional religions in Africa, the reestablishment of traditional religions, which were pulling away people, or Protestantism in charismatic in South America and Africa and parts of Asia, driving people away because if you need an exorcist, you would normally think Catholic, and so that's part of their market, right? But once you have these other groups coming in, or groups like the Santa Muerta devotion, which border on things that they would consider demonic, well then you have to kind of deal with that. So we saw this exorcism thing, and I think this Marian apparition and paranormal, or whatever they're calling it, the supernatural, is probably going to do that. And part of that too is the idea of the supernatural in Catholic theology literally means that it's above and beyond nature. It is only given by God. And so in the Middle Ages, a lot of the debate was debating the difference between supernatural miracles, demonic deceptions, and then natural magic, right? Like, so things that were laws of nature that we just didn't get yet, but we could figure out. And so I think this is probably a re-up on that kind of debate. Once you have the reality of UAPs coming out, you're going to have to figure out, like, okay, well, that's definitely not supernatural, but some of the effects around it seem supernatural. So how do we, work through that?
Oh, sweet innocent David! If only you knew the truth. We all know it's blue beam. Come on.
Well, the thing we have to remember about the Catholic Church too is, like, their decision-making process is not as a spirit. They don't think and move like a spiritual organization. They think and move like a corporation, because that's what they are.
Yeah, it's a market.
Yeah. So they're making moves to protect or to establish markets. They're not making these moves out of any kind of concern for our spiritual well-being.
Yeah,
it's about their pockets. That's really what it's about.
Yeah, well, and control. I mean, they panicked with the Santa Muerta stuff because it really it was hard cutting into their market. So
do we? I mean, I was joking obviously about the blue beam thing, but it has.
It could be true. I mean, honestly, maybe, you know, who knows? We don't know. We don't have the inside line on what the.
No, but it's like that has reared its head again recently, hasn't it? Blue beam. It's become a real.
Yeah.
I see it everywhere. Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah.
Should we go?
It never ends.
I've never really known the source of blue beam. Where did it appear from?
Allegedly, it was like a nurse that worked with Von Braun or something, or a secretary. I don't know. It was allegedly, the story is that it was someone who had worked with Von Braun, and that it was like kind of like an oral tradition that Von Braun had said.
Oh yeah, it did. Yeah, that is the supposedly Von Braun said that was a thing.
Yeah,
but it almost seemed like an offhanded. Like he kind of like threw it, kind of a throwaway statement that he made.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it's those, you know, the oral stuff from a random person. What weirds me out with that stuff is that tons of people worked with Von Braun.
Yeah.
Like, and this is one of the things that like is kind of eerie to me when I look into this stuff is that Kenneth Arnold, for example, right? Kenneth Arnold doesn't look to have ever talked to J. Allen Hynek. Hynek may have talked to him at a conference in the 70s, right? But like doesn't appear that he ever really had an interview with Arnold. And yet we as a culture think of Arnold as sort of the progenitor of the flying saucer.
Yeah.
idea.
The origin of the description for sure. Yeah.
But if you go back in the actual documentation in that, like there had been UFOs, you know, like as we think of them since 42.
Yeah.
And they were in the news. It was in the Foo Fighters, everybody knows that stuff, the Ghost Rockets, all the rest of it. But
the airships of the 1800s.
Yeah. Well, but there were even like saucer descriptions and some of that World War II stuff. Yeah. And so, which, you know, Arnold didn't see saucers. But then the other weird thing is that Arnold's like all his papers and everything, like his daughter and his family have them. And it doesn't really look like anybody's ever really gone and looked at them. And Arnold didn't think that they were mechanical craft. He thought that they were some kind of either, you know, like a Trevor J. Constable sort of sky critter thing, or that they were vehicles of the dead, because he had been searching for a crashed marine transport when he had the sighting. And then there were some weird date synchronicities with that led him to think that it was whatever. But towards the end of his life, he was upset because he saw what he had experienced as a spiritual experience.
Right.
And the mechanization and the like, let's find the alien spaceship.
The nuts and bolts people, yeah.
Yeah, really turned him off. But what's interesting is that like it doesn't seem that anybody talked to him. Right? Like Ray Palmer like published some stuff, but it doesn't seem so for all this research, like there's nobody went and talked to Arnold while he was alive.
Not surprising. Not surprising though.
You know, not surprising, right? And that's the thing. But then when you start to go through all this stuff, it's like the Von Braun thing. It's like the dude was the head over. I mean, he was the head of the U.S. space program.
Yeah.
Like, really, like there's only like 2 people that ever talked to him that had anything. You know, like So it's very strange, like just the disconnects, you know, and amongst researchers. Like I'm going to be talking to Mike Clellan tomorrow. And Mike and I have like paralleled each other since 2009. We both kind of started writing publicly on the internet around that. And I've met him once at the Rice conference a couple of years ago, and we've never really talked. I mean, we've since then have communicated and stuff, but it's amazing because like there's just so much of that. Like there's this disparate, you know, this idea that we're all like, oh, we're all researching this thing, or we're all like, you know, exploring this thing. But the reality is like, that doesn't play out, you know. The people are there to talk to. I mean, that was kind of one of my drivers when I first started going online was that, oh, hey, you can talk to anybody. right? Like, I think, Joe, that's kind of how we started talking, was because I had, been around the Ox Hat thing and the Grey Lodge and all that. And like, and so, just started talking. But a lot, with this and the conspiracy mindset that you're talking about, Ken, really draws people away from that, because suddenly, I mean, Joe, you've experienced this extensively. You become this like mythological figure that people talk about, but won't actually contact.
I can't talk to.
Yeah, exactly. Despite being approachable,
I mean, there's people like that do approach me, and the way they act towards me is like very confusing to me, because I can tell they've got some kind of concept of me that's not who I am, but they've built it up. It's definitely not a profile that I've engaged and tried to foster myself. Like it's not a persona, but for some reason it's a projection by a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's not helped by people whose names I won't use, but like conspiracy theorists who have gone on the record time and time again, like trying to like make some connections between me and whatever the thing of the week is. I think you know who I'm talking about, Dave. Yeah. Several somebodies, but so there's the barrier there. Like, to me, I just like to talk to people. I meet people online. I'm happy to talk to people that approach me, but I find that for some reason I'm not allowed to, because these people don't let me. Like they have a concept of what I'm supposed to be, and then they come to me with that, and I'm trying to speak through that, or trying to convince them that I'm not that, and it becomes exhausting,
Yeah.
It's like one person that I thought knew better, like we talked for a while, and then they started to like accuse me of like, you're running your nonlinear or your neuro-linguistic programming on me. I'm like, my what?
Yeah, sorry about that. It's a bad day.
It's like, when have I ever said anything about being an NLP master, for one thing? Like, because
you wouldn't. Why would you? That's your. But
secret. I lived in Santa Cruz, and I knew a lot of those EST people and those NLP people in Santa Cruz, and they were, like, I wouldn't piss on the people if they were on fire. They were just like not worth it. Like they're not good people. They don't have good intentions. Like everybody's doing this thing where they're trying to mask what they're really doing in the language of the new age. I'm trying to immunitize the eschaton or whatever they're trying to do. But really what they're doing is they're playing power games with people. Yeah. That's all they're doing. They're trying to manipulate people linguistically. And I'm just not okay with that.
No, and you see a lot of them seem to be on Gaia now, don't they? Have you seen that?
Yeah.
It's crazy. I kind of like being ill, because it gives me an excuse to kind of explore all these kind of like, it wound me up with all the Twitter stuff I was reading, and my Hyperreality thing. But I kind of have this soft spot for Gaia, even though I know it's like this horrible nest of, whatever you want to call it. But I can't resist. I have to go in and look at what people are saying. Like it's like I don't know, it's a morbid curiosity or some kind of like sickness I have, where I have to kind of have to go and see.
I used to do, dude, and I finally have broken myself from it. Thank to God.
I can't. I'm addicted to it.
Like, I don't care what they're saying. Because it doesn't matter. If you don't pay attention to it, it really doesn't matter.
No, true. But I don't know. There's still, it's my bread and butter, I suppose.
I hear you. I have to
keep an eye on this kind of stuff. But yeah, God, some of this. I mean, Nori. What the hell happened to Nori?
Yeah,
he's fully in that world.
When was he ever anything but an idiot?
Well, I suppose when he was kind of like Art Bell's apprentice, it almost felt like, didn't it? At one point, he seemed okay at that point, but then but he's gone full like deep into it now. Like he's really taken the money, as it were. Like with Gaia, I mean, he must be making more money because he's barely on Coast to Coast anymore. So he must be on. He must be making the money at Gaia now, I suppose. But
or somewhere,
some of the people he talks to, oh my God! I mean, I can't even. It's just too many. It's like every episode. Like there's no. It's not like UFOs or anything anymore. He's talking to people about like. Do you remember that Star Babies thing or Star Children, whatever it was?
Starseed.
Yeah.
Starseed. Yeah. So like, wasn't that just like parents trying to explain away their kids' ADHD or something? Or
no, that's you're thinking Indigo.
Indigo.
Yeah. That's
it. The Starseed thing, but that's actually got like a really deep, interesting history to it.
Oh, okay, interesting.
In the commercial sense, like the Indigo children. did kind of align with neurodiversity and the idea of exploring those topics. Part of it comes out of the Puharic Geller kids thing, where they were identifying kids that had psychic potentials and then trying to figure out how to train them up, which got kind of wild under Puharic's thing. But so, and then it became part of the kind of the culture. But that's been around there. I mean, like that Venusians walk our streets from like 1952 or 3 or no, it was 55. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it goes back. But
Leary and Wilson got kind of hooked on the starseed thing for a little while.
Yeah, the starseed thing you're talking about, that's like it's a current sort of lifestyle brand of it's really interesting. It's an interesting. I do enjoy the starseed.
So what is the starseed then? What's the difference between the starseed and because the indigo thing, from what I've seen at least on Gaia, is my kid's misbehaving at school. He's an indigo child. He's not. He hasn't got ADHD, unchecked ADHD.
Yeah, it's also the Institute of Noetic Science was founded. Edgar Mitchell founded it. Like he was the kind of the head of it. But there was a guy, John White, that was the education director. And one of the reasons that they used Institute of Noetic Science was John White was working with this concept of Homo noeticus, right? So like the next, right, we're Homo sapien, and then the next one is Homo noeticus. So it's like the evolutionary like move that we're going to go into in the new age, right? Like both layering on all the commercial things that we kind of associate with that, but then also stripping it off as like a concept of sort of evolutionary theory.
So it's a bit like Alice Bailey kind of stuff, isn't it? Alice Bailey was talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, which was influencing that conversation. But so the starseed thing is different than the indigo. The indigo would be like the larval stage of the Homo noeticus, right? And then the starseed is actually the idea of people being hybrid from or walk-ins, right? The idea that you're about to commit suicide and a glowing entity shows up and says, hey, I'm a Pleiadian and I really need to like work on this plane, like can I use your body if you don't want it, and then they walk in and they take the body and you don't have to kill yourself and whatever happens to that spirit or whatever. But and then the star, so there's the hybrid stuff where you have some sort of lineage to whatever star system or non-human intelligence, or even Atlantean or Lemurian, right? So like pre-deluge civilizations, or the idea of like that, the walk-in, or you actually are a Pleiadian, right? Or a Syrian or a Lyrian. I mean, there's a whole sort of storyline that goes through that, which gets more or less detailed depending on what you're looking at. So starseeds from the stars, indigos, they're like our next step in evolution.
They're just ADHD kids.
The indigo refers to the color of their aura, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that goes back to like the idea of like the violet ray and
yeah.
And that's really, I mean, that's where the stuff gets interesting, is just the ways that what we are, like what appears on a TikTok video is like a fully created worldview, right? Like a full mythos that someone's living in. And then when you start to track it down and sort of look at where did all these narrative threads come from, it's this amazing like amalgam of influences that like have spread and then gotten trimmed off, and sort of eked into that. And so, and that,
I think the internet accomplished one thing. It accomplished a few things, but like one of the things that it accomplished was the accessibility of this kind of stuff. Because like back in the 80s, this kind of stuff that we're talking about was very marginal. Very marginal. And now it's like mainstream. And I think that's really facilitated by the internet. Like the access to the information.
Well, it was different. It was a different kind of marginal, though, because you got like Ruth Montgomery, who was actually a major writer, reporter, news person. She had done some Washington D.C.
right
sort of correspondence stuff, but she was really big into she was actually one of the people that what do you call it, like refined the walk-in concept, because the walk-in concept comes from like George Hunt Williamson, and that had talked about walk-ins, and then the raw material, which draws on some of the Williamson stuff,
right
had also talked about walk-ins, and so you can find it in these different
Yeah.
like threads. But Ruth Montgomery presented it then as, she went around, there's a book, Aliens Among Us, where she was going to like like blue blood families and like corporate heads and executives, and talking to them about how they felt that they were aliens, or that they felt that they had like that they were walk-ins, and that their
Right.
success was because something else had come in,
right
and tying it to this idea that like these aliens are amongst us and that they're shaping society, which again I guess goes back to the conspiracy thing. Like there's so many, this has kind of been brewing under it, but to the point of like the marginalization in that, like she wasn't a socially marginal person necessarily, right? But the availability of that thing, it wasn't built into a feedback loop. I mean, like we're literally, like every time we interact with the internet, we're interacting with a biofeedback machine that's feeding us and training our brains and entraining us.
Yep.
Whereas a book doesn't do that in the same way, right? Like
Yep.
you can enter this like sort of mind space in that, but you're not having this weird feedback of like stimulus and like
Right.
and the rest of it.
Yeah,
So
it's not real
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, you watch the TikTok video or the YouTube, whatever, right? Like whatever platform it is, but the audio visual and that dopamine fix, right? So then you're thinking about like walk-ins, and you get a dopamine fix, and if the production's right and everything, you're really getting a fix, right? You're really like, oh man, like, and then you keep getting that fed, and then you start to see the number synchronicities, and you have a coincidence or you have a synchronicity, and suddenly, oh my God, it's true, like I'm a hybrid, and it's weird with the we were saying about people not wanting facts. In some, because I actually did like a kind of like a year-long study of the starseed thing, because I wanted to know where it came from, and it was amazing because some of the folks who were sort of the the influencers in that, they would present these things that they downloaded from whatever star system or whatever they were talking about, and it would just be a rehash of material that was in other books.
Yeah.
And so I asked some of them, I was like, hey, like that's an interesting concept. Like, do you support your downloads with reading? Because I was trying to find a way to like get past that defense of like, I didn't read that, I got that from them. And it wasn't even a lie, right? Like they weren't even covering up the fact that they had read it. They had downloaded it, and that's what they were living in. They had downloaded it. You go back like a year or two in their Instagram, and they're holding up the book that has the thing that they were talking about that they had downloaded. But in their worldview, because of this feedback and this everything, that those memories don't connect, right? Like the fact that they read that book 3 years ago and did a review on Instagram does not connect with the fact that they downloaded the exact same narrative, 2 years down the line. And they live in that. That's they
write it off like the way like somebody like Al Bielek back in the 90s, when he used to call me on the phone.
Example. Yeah.
He like I'm like, so how did you where did this all come from? He was like, well, I saw the movie about the Philadelphia experiment, and then I had recall. I remembered, wait, this is about me. Right. So like that's how you do it. It's like you didn't get it from the movie. The movie just triggered the repressed memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. When in fact he got it from the movie, but but the way he justified it was like the movie made me remember. And I've had movies that I've watched where it triggered, there's something about the movie that triggered some kind of memory that I had from the past.
Right.
And I'm like, this is just tickling something that and I think about it and I think about it and think about it, and eventually it'll dawn on me. I'm like, oh, that's what it was. It's like that thing on the table reminded me of the thing that was on the table when I was growing up. It's something like that. But you have to give it some effort,
to trace
it back, and then probably you will. But if you just like toss it off, you're like, oh, I watched this movie and there was this thing on the table and it triggered a memory of like my past life. It was like, no,
right.
It triggered a memory from this life.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like like those memory triggers and that, you know, when you have, you know, that the worldview, like this conspiracy worldview that we're sort of broadly talking about, then those memory retrievals and stuff like that work into that worldview, you know. And so since all movies are predictive programming, right? Because every movie is predictive programming, well, then when it triggers that memory, you're now you're deeper into this. You know, you're deeper into the story of this thing. Yeah. And that's the, you know, you're talking about, Ken, like the idea of like the new age, like being like the original anti-vaxxers and that. There's an anti-establishmentarian, like an anti-authoritarian bent to wanting to be this new thing, you know, this to carry forward a rebirth of the world against the old order, you know. And so you know, I think that plays into it too. Like,
which fundamentally is not a bad thing to like not want to continue this shit show that we live in.
That's punk rock, isn't it? I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
But also, I mean, yeah, there's that, but there's also the side of it where it's what they call main character syndrome, isn't there? This idea that you have to be special, or you know, you have to, you know, you're not rebelling against anything, you're just trying to stand out from everybody else. Or so there's that. My cynical side kicks that in.
Well, yeah, but also it's a big red flag for insincere actors to hop on board and like hijack the narrative for a lot of people. And so there's a lot of things working against you, unfortunately. As we discovered in the 80s in the punk rock era, we thought we were changing the world, and then we weren't.
Yeah. And then we weren't.
And the internet, the same thing. Like a lot of people that weren't around for the early days of the internet forget how utopian that whole scene was. Like we were going to change the world, and for the better. And information was going to be free, and all these things. Like
that's all you saw on the well, wasn't it? Back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day, that's all you saw. It's like information was going to be free. Anonymity is a right, like et cetera, until that was like, you know, like abused. And then people became skeptical, and as they should. And but that's the thing, is like it got hijacked as soon as money entered as soon as Netscape did that initial IPO, the initial public offering, and everybody made a ton of money on that if they were, you know, somebody that invested in Netscape, and I worked there, so I had stock. And then I just watched everybody's attitude change like overnight. People that I knew like would basically like early day Burning Man burners, which was like before it became commercial, you know, started to become capitalists like overnight. People started acting like capitalists and had tons of money, and you know, started throwing elbows around, and it's like really wasn't fun. But that's the we see that again and again. And so like I always say, like, what's the next thing? Because for me, the interesting aspect of those kind of movements is like the very, very early days before anybody co-ops it. There's like just a grace period you get. I call it the Wild West period. So you get a grace period. It's not going to last. So as long as you know that, your heart doesn't get broken.
But I mean, even the Starseed stuff, I mean, like really, when you track back the history, it's kind of cool. You know, you got Brad Steiger with the Starbirth Odyssey and like hypnosis and stuff, which is great. It's like a multi-tape self-hypnosis thing, which is just a really fun ride with Brad Steiger. There's he did a thing with Halpern, which was, Stephen Halpern did the music on that, but he also did one ET contact experience. So you just put this tape on, and it's a self-hypnosis to like get yourself into the mind state of having an ET contact experience, which is pretty sweet, you know. I don't know. I mean, like the history, like you're saying, that Wild West period of that concept before it becomes a commercialized identity and lifestyle brand, like is actually really interesting now that it's been derived into a commercial product and service.
And that's when it's useful, is like when it's in that Wild West period. It's like when it's actually useful.
Yeah. Well, I think that, you know, I think there's valid things to look at there. I mean, there's a lot of kind of interesting things about, yeah, just kind of the way that all of it played out with the psychic research and the UFO topic and history and the individuals and stuff. I think there's something to look at there with the starseed thing that goes beyond just like these people are delusional. You know, maybe the lifestyle brand stuff, maybe, but like the core of that is actually kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, it's not any different than like when you know, like I read some of the people that are explaining the UAP experiences that they had. You know, I don't look at like these are some crazy people having, you know, like, no, I think they're literally, and usually what is the signal for me is there something really irrational and surreal that happened during the experience. That's a sign to me that like this is probably a legitimate experience.
Yeah.
Because as you know, it seems like these real experiences seem to be surreal by design.
Yeah.
And that's when you can like, oh, that one's probably real.
Well, it's because, yeah, I mean, like one of the things that we take for granted when we talk about this stuff is non-human intelligence. An interaction with non-human intelligence isn't going to have the same marker as talking to another person.
Yeah, in fact,
and you
it
get
won't.
that when you go back in the literature, right, like of the stuff that's really highlighted along the way, where, you know, even in mediumship, right, like Arthur Ford, who was a famous direct voice medium, so he would go into the trance state and then voices would come in the room and like talk. And in his book, Nothing So Strange, which is kind of like his biography, he talks about how one of his guides had been basically saying that the trouble that the intelligences that were trying to speak through mediums were having is they had to find somebody who was capable of mediumship, right? So your organism, like your brain,
Right.
like your physical body and everything is
Right.
capable of doing the mediumship. It's then trained in the mediumship, right? So you're in a culture where you accept it and you're working with the mediumship, but then also has the memory components to reassemble into messages, right? So the idea being that like these intelligences come in and in the act of mediumship, they're working with what's already there.
Yeah.
And so they can only work with what's there. So if you think about like an alien non-human intelligence versus a discarnate intelligence, which may have been human at some point,
Right.
then that working with those materials is going to be a totally different flavor of, you know, and that there's Whitley Strieber's talked about some interesting things with sort of taking the contact experiences and then doing a close reading of them, right? So doing and Kreipel's talked about this too, but using kind of hermeneutics to analyze the sort of symbol structure, right? Which you get some in the Jungian studies stuff, but that limits it to just the Jungian archetypal readings.
Right.
But when you start to look at like sort of the symbolic things, and there's been some interesting things where like the one example that I can remember was someone had seen a gray figure, and that gray figure turned into a deer and then ran away. And they coincidentally,
dream logic.
What's that?
That's like dream logic.
Yeah, dream logic. But and then they had looked at if you looked at what, I don't remember what pictographic language that they had been inspired to look at,
right?
But in pictography, the that transformation sequence actually was a hieroglyphic sequence. You know, and so stuff like that is really interesting, right? Like is looking at that, like, are these things, because we treat it like, again, the nuts and bolts idea of like, this is an alien, I'm encountering this thing, whereas is that encounter actually a hieroglyphic sequence of things that if we step out, right, like, if I'm getting really speculative and off the map here, but you know, the most vetted UFO stuff is plasma, right? Like plasmas that seem to have some sort of reactive quality.
Yeah.
So Harley Rutledge, during a Missouri flap in, I think it was the 80s, he had gone out with a team from the University of Missouri and like actually tracked these things. So they, you know, and it was plasma, and it seemed to be acting intelligently. Like if you thought move left, it would move left, and then they actually followed him to his lab, and it got weird. but his, you know, and then you've got the Heselden stuff. So plasma stuff that seems to have a cognitive reactive element to it, right? That kind of communication is going to be way different than, you know, again, just that nuts and bolts sort of thing, and would call us to meet it halfway where we're then, right? Like the Bob Monroe stuff.
Yeah.
Where we're moving outside of ourselves. That's what Ingo was recommending. That's what Burroughs said. Burroughs said we can never go to space physically. We can only go if we are able to achieve a bodiless state of awareness, right? That's Buddhism. That's Christianity. That's the spirit Germany of Muhammad, right? Like, so like that's in every tradition. That's, you know, you go to the traditional religions, or, you know, African or First Nations and all the rest of it. That's shamanism, right? It's the leaving the physical body and traveling and having these communications. And in shamanism, they are hieroglyphic sequences, and it's an encoded cipher that's in visual and interactive stuff, you know.
Well, you have to meet and this is, you know, like both from study and from my personal experience, you have to meet it halfway. And then when you meet it halfway, when your consciousness meets that consciousness halfway, a third thing is formed.
Yeah.
Like, and so the example I use when I'm talking to people about this is, because that's what I know very well, is, you know, the HTTPD, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol daemon, which is also more commonly known as a web server.
Right.
So, but at the core of the web server is like what's called a daemon, which, you know, like sits inert on a Unix server, or it could sit on a Windows server, but like we'll say, just for the sake of argument, that, like, you know, it's a Unix daemon. So it sits there and it just sits there, totally capable of doing things, but it's not doing anything until it's invoked from the outside by the browser. Right. So a string is sent to it and it's invoked, and then it comes to life and it does what it's been invoked to do. I will serve you the web page. I will give you a secure connection. I will do all these things that I'm capable of doing when I'm invoked. And when that connection is made, there's this third state that arises from it. Right. And that's a perfect example of encountering these intelligences in the wild.
Right.
It's like, you have to be in the right state of mind.
Yep.
Like, no, and it doesn't, like, there's any number of ways that you get there. Sometimes it's by accident.
Right.
But you're there. And so you make this invocation, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, or you stumble into it. And that's, you know, completely legitimate as well. And then this connection is made, and this thing that wasn't doing anything until it made the connection with you now, you know, comes to life, and there's an arisal of the third thing that comes out of it. And there's a whole different experience that happens for you and for it.
Right.
Right. So that's what's going on, I think. And the beauty of all this, I think, is, you know, like, I used to be considered an outlier. Like in the 80s, I would say these kind of things. Like I was probably like right in line with Valet, where it's like, I don't think these are nuts and bolts craft that are coming from another galaxy. Like, and I don't think these are, you know, extraterrestrial intelligences that we're talking to. Like, I think they're more, you know, like Mactonies. I think they're crypto-terrestrials. Like, they probably were always here. And then start pointing to examples throughout history and prehistory. Like, you know, this has been going on for a long time. And yes, it takes the guise of what we have in our mind,
right,
so it can speak to us, so that we understand it, we can interpret it. But like you said, if you're going to be talking to these other intelligences that are non-human, you can't expect them to speak human languages.
Right.
Like, and often, I mean, you could say that kind of thing is, well, I think we spoke about this before, but like, you know, there's these experiences that people have. So you have like Bob Wilson, Leary, Crowley, you know, all these people that have these kind of downloads of information.
Yeah.
That's that kind of thing, isn't it? So it's like they're invoking that demon, as it were, and not being able to, at first at least, properly translate what's been told to them. You know, so it's this kind
of course.
Yeah.
Well, that's, I mean, you get, Crowley's a perfect example. He grew up in a fundamentalist Christian background. So what does he write like, right? Like, he writes like the King James Bible.
Yeah.
And he uses the these and thous and the rest of it. Whereas other writers in that milieu didn't do that because they weren't interested in continuing anything that had anything to do with Christianity, right? Like, you read like the Golden Dawn and stuff. They're not interested in continuing a Christian thing. They're using something else. Well, so, yeah, they have the you got the little more.
They definitely have the echo.
Yeah, the echo of it.
Yeah.
You know.
What,
but they were then
backdoor Christianity.
Backdoor Christianity.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to remember, like, before those sketchy documents showed up, if they ever showed up, all those guys that founded the Golden Dawn were like members of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
They all came from a like Rosicrucian / Christian Rosenkreuz background. And then and then supposedly they got the Fräulein Spengel documents, which
Well, we just did a show about that with Christopher McDonald, who pretty much completely disproves that. But that was real. But it's interesting stuff, though.
What? I've worked with the Golden Dawn material for a long time, and some of it works.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. I mean,
it's
what we say. We said in the episode. It doesn't really. I don't believe necessarily that the ayahuasca experience is what Crowley said it was, but it doesn't matter because that's the story that gets you into the real stuff, as it were. That's the gateway. You need a good story. People respond to stories, don't they? And it's the most powerful thing on earth, really, a good story. Right. So if you've got a good story, it's how religions exist to this day, isn't it? You just have to have you have to interact with that story in a certain way for it to work, to get you into the main thing. And that's always been the case, I think. I mean, throughout history. So I mean, it doesn't matter that it's not real.
The etymology of incantation is to sing into, incantare, right? So like you enter the song, and that's that narrative that drives you,
Yeah. It's all about stories, man.
But it is, yeah.
Yeah.